On May the 10th, 1972, Colchester's theatre history began a new chapter. The opening of the Mercury Theatre brought to fulfillment 6 years planning and 2 years building. Close to the Roman Balkan Gate of Colchester, it was called Mercury after the Roman god of communication. The famous Roman statuette of Mercury was dug up just outside the town at Gosbecks, the site of Colchester's first known theatre. This Roman theatre is something like the famous one at St. Albans. It was shaped like a D in plan, and excavations revealed that it had been made of wood. In those days, performances took place in the open air. Near our own time, inn-yards and barns were used for performances of plays in the 18th century. Hogarth's Actresses Undressing in a Barn shows a typical touring company of the time. It was not until 1764 that the first permanent theatre was built in Colchester behind the old Moot Hall in High Street. 8 local gentlemen contributed £100 each to pay for the building. We don't know what it looked like inside, perhaps like this typical Georgian country playhouse. Or perhaps it looked like the 18th century playhouse at Richmond in Yorkshire. The Colchester Playhouse was leased to the Norwich Company of Comedians, who played on a circuit which included Norwich, Cambridge and Bury St. Edmunds, and they performed most of the famous comedies and tragedies of the time. It lasted until 1812, when the Theatre Royal was opened in Queen Street, on the site where the Eastern National Garage now stands. All that remains is the doorway to the gallery entrance. The Theatre Royal seated 1,200 people, and it had a special box for the mayor. During its lifetime, it saw the change from the visits by the old circuit companies to the touring companies of the 80s and after, often with the ever-popular melodramas with a wealth of realistic scenery and the orchestra playing away in the orchestra pit. From the time the Theatre Royal was burnt down in 1918, Colchester had its music halls. The Grand, soon renamed the Hippodrome, was opened in 1904. During its first years, the great stars of the time appeared there: Marie Lloyd, Vesta Tilley, Lady de Vries, wife of the owner of the Hippodrome. The intricate plasterwork inside the theatre, around the circle and along the boxes, included the beautiful emblem over the proscenium arch, representing an oyster shell flanked by the figures of agriculture and fishing, all related to the Colchester area. After the First World War, music hall became variety, and the Hippodrome was increasingly given over to film, which made way for pantomime at Christmas. There were other places of entertainment too: the Gaiety and Music Hall in Fairfax Road, now a man's club. The Vaudeville, where St. Botolph's Circus now stands, later became the Empire and showed films well into the early 1960s. The Headgate, now the Cameo Cinema, once the Electric Theatre, where Arthur Askey made his debut. The Playhouse was built in 1926 as a theatre, but soon became a cinema, and for some time there was no theatre for straight plays in Colchester. It was the Albert Hall and Art Gallery at the top of the High Street which became Colchester's next theatre, when in 1937 it became the home of the Colchester Repertory Company. The company was founded by the ebullient Robert Digby, a Colchester man who became master of the theatre's fortunes during the next 26 years, and Beatrice Radley, a charming actress-singer. The resident company of actors who won the support of the town, and many of them are still remembered with affection. Some of the early ones achieving fame later on. A different play was presented every week, the same group of actors playing one play at night and rehearsing another during the day, with the producer and designer having to plan at least one play further ahead. By 1964, the only way for the scenery was through the front doors, where the audience came in. At weekends, changeovers, the scenery had to be stacked in the auditorium over the seats, because the workshops had to be transferred to the other side of the town. Although high standards of presentation were maintained, and some outstanding effects were achieved, the dressing rooms were cramped and airless, and although every effort was made to keep life cheerful, the rooms were called after the 7 deadly sins, conditions for everyone had become unbearable. Survival depended upon a new theatre. The old St. Mary's Rectory Gardens in the centre of the town, between Jumbo, the Water Tower, and the Roman Balkan Gateway, was offered as a site by the Colchester Borough Council with a grant of £60,000 towards building costs, provided that similar sum could be raised by public appeal. With this stimulus, Colchester New Theatre Trust came into being, with a steering committee to raise a public appeal and supervise the planning of the building. This team of distinguished theatre lovers appointed the Colchester architect Norman Downey, and with the offer of a grant of £90,000 from the Arts Council, the financial planning of what seemed to be a tiringly responsible project was begun. The chairman of the trust was Lord Allport, with Mr. Bernard Mason, the chairman of the Repertory Company, as vice-chairman of the trust. The ceremony to mark the beginning of the building was held on the 2nd of May 1970. Spring weather arrived just in time, and everyone was invited who had given donations by covenant and had become sponsors and founder members of the theatre. The appeal target figure of £60,000 had been reached the day before. We all made our way through the crowd to a special platform under a marquee placed where the theatre was to be built. Speeches were made by Lord Allport, chairman of the trustees, the Mayor of Colchester, Alderman Hillam, the drama director of the Arts Council, Dick Linklater, and by me. The distinguished actor, Eric Porter, who had become a patron of the theatre, ceremonially buried a casket of coins beneath where the foundations were to be in the theatre foyer. The building contract had been awarded to Messrs. Evers of Tiptree, and everything was ready for them to move in. Soon site clearance was underway. Some of the old trees which had stood in the rectory gardens had to be removed and the ground levelled. By this time, the vital decisions had to be made as to what kind of a theatre it was to be. The budget was a modest one, £260,000. It was to seat about 500 people. But should it have a picture frame stage with curtain or an open stage? If only we could have both. There is no set pattern of design for modern theatres. 100 or so years ago, all theatres were planned on similar lines, like the old Colchester Theatre Royal. Stage, auditorium with a circle, horseshoe-shaped, going round, with curtain, orchestra pit, and large stage. Later on came the super cinemas, large auditorium, fan-shaped walls, stage, with those walls that came in at the side, making the picture frame getting very much in the way, particularly for Shakespearean productions. Chichester Theatre offered an open Shakespearean stage thrusting forward, being surrounded on all three sides by an audience who sit round, with no proscenium arch, just a stage. Theatre in the round might be the answer, actors in the middle and the audience sitting round on four sides. The new National Theatre has stage, auditorium, half-moon-shaped, right-angled back walls, side stages trucked on wheels to move in scenery, making the shape of a cross, a cruciform stage. The Leicester Phoenix Theatre and the Mermaid have stage and auditorium all in one big room. No separation of audience and stage, just one line, no proscenium arch, no curtain. The stage in that kind of theatre has no wings, which can be very useful for scenery, and the auditorium is small. To make more room for the audience, it is possible to outspread the walls into a fan shape. With wings, this makes a very good shape, which has been used, for instance, at the Exeter Northcote Theatre, with stage, auditorium, wing space, fan-shaped auditorium. But the back seats in the corners are not so good. If you cut these off, you then end with the shape of an auditorium of a hexagon in this diagram. Stage, auditorium. If you have a hexagonal stage as well as auditorium, two hexagons together, stage, auditorium, and you join round those two hexagons one large hexagon, which will enclose both of them in one big hexagon, then there is the shape of a stage, auditorium, with two areas at the side, which was the beginning of the unique idea of the Mercury. Soon construction was well underway, and the first shape to be revealed was the foundation of the hexagonal stage. Before long, the building had reached ground level. October 1970 was a landmark. On his first visit with me and architect Norman Downey was Christopher Morley, head of design of the Royal Shakespeare Theatre Company and theatre consultant to the Mercury. It was he who had conceived the double hexagon idea, which was the secret of the Mercury's unique ability to adapt from an open stage to a picture frame stage with a curtain. The building had made great progress during the first 4 months. It was the first time ever any of us had been on the Mercury stage, and it was the greatest thrill. Now the time had come for the last night of the old Repertory Theatre, the company's home for 35 years. It was the last night of the Christmas pantomime. There were speeches, and at the end we sang Auld Lang Syne. Backstage there was champagne and ice cake, and we all said farewell to the old building for the last time. At the new theatre, the building, equipping and furnishing became hectic. Would everything be finished on time? There didn't seem enough hours in each day. The bronze figure of Mercury gave an inspired finishing touch to the outside. Could the distinctive feature of adaptability inside be made to work? The side walls of the auditorium had to be made to close in, making a narrower stage and a narrower auditorium with a curtain. The moving auditorium walls were split into panels, each panel being supported by a steel frame like an access tower on wheels. The panels were hinged so that those on top made lighting positions. The bottom ones could be removed. Towers could then be pushed over the seats without the seats having to be taken away. Each section of wall could be moved in turn. In this way, the auditorium and the stage could be opened and closed, offering a flexibility of presentation not available in this way anywhere else in the world. The Mercury's revolutionary contribution to theatre design really worked. What more exciting beginning could a new theatre have